Howdy, Dennis Bradford here. Let's think some about being, feeling, and doing better. What are prayers of intercession? How should we think about them? Prayers of intercession, intercessory prayer, intercession, are appeals to the divine on behalf of others. In previous videos, we've distinguished 5 kinds of prayers, namely prayers of petition, intercession, thanksgiving, adoration, and unity. We considered petitionary prayer in the previous video. Let's consider intercessory prayer in this video. There is biblical warrant for intercessory prayer. Paul writes, quote, "I beseech you, therefore, first of all, to offer to God petitions, prayers, supplications, and thanksgiving for all men." End quote. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1, Lamsa translation. Coming from our contemporary intellectual environment of mass confusion, we should ask, why pay any attention whatsoever to such a putative spiritual authority? It's a good question. If you were raised as a Christian and have never before asked it, it's time. To answer it, I use Dr. Hawkins' scale of human consciousness. In a number of videos in the Emotional Empowerment playlist on this Dennis Bradford PhD YouTube channel, I not only explain that scale, but also how to use it for yourself. If it interests you, I encourage you to learn much more about it by reading such books of his as Power versus Force, The Eye of the I, and I. Here's its main idea. Every entity, existent, real object, radiates at least a minute energy field. That level can be determined by energy testing and then plotted on a scale devised by Dr. Hawkins of 1 to 1,000. Each level transforms information in terms of its own distinctive view of what is significant. Any calibration of a work or of a person between 1 to 199 is life-denying. Any calibration between 200 and 1,000 is life-affirming. 200 is the transition from falsehood and no integrity to truth and integrity. Quote, "The levels below 200 represent suffering in all its forms," end quote, from The Eye of the I. In addition to level 200, there are 2 other critical transition points. One is at 600. Those who calibrate at 600 or higher are sages. Depending upon the degree of spiritual enlightenment, there are levels of sagehood from 600 to 1,000. Fewer than 0.5% of humans are sages, and I'm not one. Sages are, however, the only ones we should select as our teachers. They have successfully detached from their egocentricity, from their persons, personalities, personhoods. They are the only masters of the art of living. Sages live lives of selfless service. The other transition is at 500. Calibrations between 1 and 499 are animalistic, and those between 500 and 1,000 are spiritual. As humans, we are animals. As beings, we are spiritual. Our human condition is to be split between matter and spirit. In other words, we have a dual nature. The lower domain is the linear domain of form, thought, emotions, causality, and perception. The higher domain is the nonlinear domain of formlessness and no thought that is beyond emotions, causality, and perception. If, as you should be, you're interested in living better, it's important to realize that, quote, "the level of experiential happiness rises in exact accord with the level of consciousness," end quote, from Discovery of the Presence of God. The greatest spiritual teachers in history, such as Jesus Christ and the Buddha, calibrated at 1,000. As Nietzsche and many others have pointed out, there's a critical difference between, say, Christ and Christians, Christ's followers. The teachings of all religious avatars become distorted and diluted over time. For example, today, the teachings of Christianity have deteriorated into the 400s. And the teachings of Zen Buddhism have deteriorated into the 600s. Why appeal to anything in the Bible as spiritual authority? Our fundamental epistemological problem is that we have no innate way of distinguishing what is true from what is false. We've all made the mistake of believing that a proposition was true when it wasn't. The solution is to use the scale of consciousness, energy testing, to guide our beliefs and actions. If we use George M. Lamsa's translation of the Holy Bible from the Aramaic of the Peshitta and delete all the Old Testament except for Genesis, Psalms, and Proverbs, and also delete the book of Revelation from the New Testament, its calibration is a whopping 880. Therefore, prayers of intercession seem to have value. That value comes from their other directedness. People who calibrate below 200 are always and only self-directed. They are mired in egocentricity. They don't even accept responsibility for the quality of their own lives. Unfortunately, about 80 or 85% of humans still fall into that category. Engaged in without egocentricity, prayers of intercession are attempts to help others live better. There's nothing at all wrong with that. On the other hand, like petitionary prayer, prayers of intercession focus on conceptualized content. They are products of thoughts rather than products of no thought. In that sense, they cannot be engaged in without egocentricity. Again, thought separates, whereas no thought unites. As explained in the emotional empowerment videos, all thought comes from our individualized conceptual hierarchies. Thinking is a way of being egocentric. To think is to separate. When you pray for the welfare of another, you're presupposing separation between you and that other. Reinforcing separation is the opposite of loving. The scale of human consciousness is really a scale of delusion and love. The lower the calibration, the greater the delusion, and the less the love. People who calibrate below 200 are incapable of love because they live in a hellish world of egocentric delusions. Those between 200 and 499 are those who engage in prayers of intercession. They may, and should, be engaged in ego attrition, in the difficult process of detaching from egocentricity or selfishness. Their minds, though, are not yet sufficiently purified, trained, disciplined. The paradigm shift to genuine love begins at 500. Unconditional love is unavailable until 540 or higher. If so, although the intention behind intercessory prayer is to be helpful and loving, such prayer has a built-in obstacle to success. Instead of trying to do good in that way, it would be better to focus on raising one's own calibration to over 500, or even better, to over 600. Trying to be a do-gooder is not the same as doing good. In conclusion, for some people, prayers of intercession can seem to be a step in the right direction. However, since they cannot really be disentangled from egocentricity, prayers of intercession are more self-serving with a small s than self-serving with a capital S. In the next video, let's consider prayers of thanksgiving and adoration. Peace.